Hello and welcome to week 23 of Geography. This week we are going to be learning about Egypt, so let's take a look at Google Classroom. On day 1, we will do this together. We will read these pages and then you'll answer a few questions from the book. On day 2, you'll read this on your own or with your teacher, and you'll define these words and do a couple more questions from the book. On day 3, there's a couple more questions. These are review questions, and there's a fun little assignment on page 473. Let me read that for you quick. It is a journaling activity. So you're going to imagine that a pharaoh from ancient Egypt is visiting you today in modern time, and you're going to write down your conversation, maybe some places you would take the pharaoh, and what similarities between the past and the present do you think he would find. So that assignment is on your book on page 473. You're going to do that on day 3, so Thursday probably. And then there's some IXLs if you have extra time to practice or do work. There's IXLs. And day 4, there is a test on chapter 16, and your teacher will get that to you on day 4. It is open book, so hopefully you've reviewed the material enough so that you're familiar with where things are in the book for the test. Let us go into our PowerPoint. And we are on Egypt this week, which is in North Africa. So a lot of people don't know this, actually, is that Egypt is in Africa. So now you know. You're smarter than most people already. But before we learn about that, it is time to walk like an Egyptian. So just a little fun dance when you think of Egyptians and how they maybe danced or walked back then. I don't think it's real, but it's just kind of fun to think about. Okay, so go to page 457 in your book, and we will begin reading there together. About Egypt's land and climate. Egypt lies in Africa's northeast corner. Vast deserts sweep over most of the country. On the map on page 459, notice the blue line running through Egypt. This is the Nile River. Egypt's location, deserts, and above all, the Nile have helped shape life in Egypt for thousands of years. Egypt's land and climate. Egypt is a large country about the same size as Texas and New Mexico together. Yet most of it is desert, so Egypt's people crowd into less than 4% of the land, or an area a little larger than the size of Maryland. The lifeline of Egypt is the Nile River, which supplies 85% of the country's water. From its sources in East Africa, the river flows 4,241 miles north to the Mediterranean Sea. This long journey makes the Nile the world's longest river. Along the Nile's banks, you can see mud brick villages, ancient ruins, and, once in a while, a city or town of modern buildings. Where the river empties into the Mediterranean Sea, you find the Nile's delta. A delta is the area formed from soil deposited by a river at its mouth. The Nile Delta is a fan-shaped area where the Nile splits into several smaller waterways. For centuries, the Nile's waters would rise in the spring. The swollen river carried silt, or small particles of rich soil. When it reached Egypt, the Nile flooded its banks. As the flood waters receded, the silt was left behind and made the land good for farming. Today, dams and channels control the river's flow and the irrigation of farmland. Sinai Peninsula. The triangle-shaped Sinai Peninsula lies southeast of the Nile Delta. This area is a major crossroads between Africa and Southwest Asia. A human-made waterway called the Suez Canal separates the Sinai Peninsula from the rest of Egypt. Egyptians and Europeans built the canal in the mid-1860s. Today, the Suez Canal is still one of the world's most important waterways. Ships use the canal to pass from the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. In making this journey, they avoid traveling all the way around Africa. Desert areas. Vast deserts cover most of Egypt. East of the Nile River spreads the Eastern Desert, also known as the Arabian Desert. West of the Nile is the much larger Libyan Desert, which covers about 2/3 of the country. Dotting both deserts are oases, or areas fed by underground water. The water allows plants to grow, giving these spots lush green growth in the midst of the hot sands. The eastern and Libyan deserts are part of the Sahara, one of the largest desert areas in the world. Sahara comes from the Arabic word meaning desert. The Sahara, about the size of the United States, stretches from Egypt westward across North Africa to the Atlantic Ocean. Climate. Wherever you go in Egypt, you find a dry desert climate of hot summers and mild winters. Egypt as a whole receives little rainfall. Cairo, the capital, averages only about 0.4 inches a year. In fact, some areas receive no rain for years at a time. Springtime in Egypt brings hot winds instead of cooling rains like we have here. These winds move west across Egypt, reaching up to 87 miles per hour. The powerful winds can harm crops and damage houses. So, to take a little break from our reading, maybe you've seen or learned about hieroglyphics in ancient Egypt. Hieroglyphics, as you see in this picture, are drawings along with symbols, and they were used to tell religion or magic, stories and myths, history, poetry, to record medicine, and just different records. So here's some examples of like this bird symbol would be the A sound. Maybe a foot would be the B letter or sound. So all these different symbols meant a different letter or sound or word. And here you can see on the temple pillars and walls, these are hieroglyphics that are still there today. So very detailed, very beautiful. And some, like I mentioned earlier, were for recording history. So here's a cartoon version of that. Now obviously hieroglyphics on walls do not move, but here's an example of hieroglyphics and how they told a story in history. Okay, so once again, hieroglyphics did not actually move. They were just pictures carved into stone, but that was an example, a cartoon example, of hieroglyphics that told a story in history. And of course, okay. Okay, back to the reading. Egypt's economy, and we're on page 460 in your book. Egypt has a developing economy that has grown considerably in recent years. Agriculture, however, remains the main economic activity. About 40% of Egypt's people work in agriculture, but only about 4% of Egypt's land is used for farming. The best farmland lies in the fertile Nile River Valley. Egypt's major crops include sugarcane, grains, vegetables, fruits, and cotton. Raw cotton, cotton yarn, and clothing are among the country's main exports. Some farmers still work the land with the simple practices and tools of their ancestors. Many use modern methods and machinery. All, however, rely on dams to control the water needed for their fields. The largest dam is called the Aswan High Dam. Find it on the map above. The dams give people control over the Nile's floodwaters. They can store waters for months behind the dams. Then they can release it several times during the year, rather than having just the spring floods. This allows farmers to harvest 2 or 3 crops a year. The dams bring challenges as well as benefits. They block the flow of silt, which means farmland is becoming less fertile. Farmers now rely on chemical fertilizer to grow crops. In addition, these dams prevent quantities of fresh water from reaching the delta. So salt water from the Mediterranean Sea now flows deeper into the delta, making the land less fertile. Industry. The Aswan High Dam provides hydroelectric power, which Egypt uses to run its growing industries. The largest industrial centers are the capital city of Cairo and the seaport of Alexandria. Egyptian factories make food products, textiles, and consumer goods. Egypt's main energy resource is oil, found in and around the Red Sea. Petroleum products make up almost half the value of Egypt's exports. The country also has iron ore and phosphates. Phosphate is a mineral salt used in fertilizer. Another important industry is tourism. Visitors come to see the magnificent ruins of ancient Egypt. Egypt's history and people. Egypt's fascinating past began about 8,000 years ago, when people first settled along the Nile to farm. In about 3100 BC, one king brought several small kingdoms together under one rule. Egypt emerged as a powerful nation. For most of the next 3,000 years, Egypt was ruled by a line of pharaohs or kings. To show the pharaoh's wealth and power, stonecutters and laborers built huge pyramids and majestic temples. Turn to page 463 to learn how the magnificent pyramids were built. The people of early Egypt created one of the world's most advanced civilization. They wrote using hieroglyphics or picture symbols. They wrote using hieroglyphics or picture signs and symbols like we talked about earlier. They made paper from papyrus, a reed that grew along the banks of the Nile. Other Egyptian achievements were the invention of a calendar to keep track of the growing season and medical skills to treat injuries and diseases. From 300 BC to AD 300, Egypt fell under the influence of Greece and Rome. You may have heard of Cleopatra, an Egyptian queen who ruled during the time of Rome's rise as a Mediterranean power. In AD 641, Arabs from the southwest Asia took control of Egypt. They practiced Islam, a religion based on the belief in one God known as Allah. most of Egypt's people began to speak Arabic language and became Muslim, as the followers of Islam are called. Today, about 94% of Egypt's people are Muslim. Egypt's modern history. By the end of the 1800s, all of Egypt, including the Suez Canal, had become part of the British Empire. Unhappy with the British rule, the people of Egypt protested many times. Finally, in 1952, a group of army officers overthrew the British-supported king, and Egypt became independent. One of the army leaders, Gamal Abdel Nasser, was Egypt's president from 1954 to 1970. Nasser made Egypt one of the most powerful countries in the Muslim world. Egypt is a republic, or a government headed by a president. A legislator makes the laws, but the president has broad powers in running the country. In recent years, various political groups have opposed the government. These groups have used armed attacks in an effort to reach their political goals. The government has tried to stop this violence. Rural and urban life. Look at the population density map on page 467. Most of Egypt's people live within 20 miles of the Nile River. More than half of Egypt's people live in rural areas. Most are farmers called fellahin. They live in villages and farm small plots of land that they rent from landowners. Many raise only enough food to feed their families. Any food left over is sold in towns at a bazaar or marketplace. Life is more modern in Egypt's cities. Many city dwellers have jobs in service, manufacturing, or construction industries. In bustling ports like Alexandria and Port Said, people engage in trade. Cairo is a huge and rapidly growing city. Almost 7 million people are crowded in its central area, with another 6 million living in its suburbs. It is the largest city in Africa. For centuries, Cairo has been a leading center of the Muslim world. Throughout the city you see schools, universities, and mosques, or places of worship for followers of Islam. Cairo's population is increasing at a rapid rate. Why? First, Egypt is a country with a high birth rate. Second, many fellahin have moved to Cairo to find work. The crowded city cannot provide enough houses, schools, and hospitals for all of its people. So the pyramids, they mention in the book, were very popular for tourism. People like to travel to Egypt to see the pyramids. And what the pyramids were used for, they were tombs for the pharaohs of Egypt, and they were built by slaves. So let's take a look around on Google Maps and see about the pyramids. I need to take this little guy in the corner. Whoops. And just plop him somewhere, like here. Here we are, standing at the base of one of the Great Pyramids. See, there's people looking around. There's some more ancient ruins over there. Looks like an ancient temple. And you can kind of see in the distance, these pyramids are not far away from a big modern city. These are all modern buildings way over in the background. Let's try a slightly different spot. Maybe here. Here's maybe some smaller pyramids or buildings. Oh, I think we were standing on the other side of this pyramid before. And it looks like if you were there in person, you could maybe go visit inside of this pyramid and look around a little bit. I don't know if we can do that on Google Maps. I don't think so. Nope. There's a garbage can so you don't litter when you're traveling. We'll try one more spot. Try this pyramid over here. Okay. So very cool. 1, 2, 3 pyramids. There's 4 just from this spot standing here. Oh look, a camel. I wonder if we can go over to it and say hi. Oh, it's getting further away. There he is. Hi, camel. Oh, he disappeared now. Oh, here we go. Look at that. Nice friendly camel walking around by Egypt. Oops. What does that thing say? Huh, I don't know. There's the camel. Okay. Bye, camel. Alright, well that's it for week 23. I'd be really excited to read your paragraphs for this assignment. So if you complete it and you're really proud of it and you want to share it with me, I may put it up here as an example for other kids to use. So really take your time. I'm excited to see what you guys, if a pharaoh came and visited today, what you would talk about with them and what you would want to show them. Alright, well I will see you next week. Let's travel around the world, through ocean, sea, and land. We don't have 80 days, but oh, our trip, it will be grand. We start in North America, USA and Canada. Up north it's cold, down south it's hot, more continents there are a lot. Let's travel around the world. South America, it's plain to see, is south of North America. There's mountains, rivers, and lots of trees. Africa is home to the deserts and the Nile River. Europe's a peninsula, I hope you're a good swimmer. Asia is the biggest continent of all. Frozen tundra up in Russia, islands I can't name them all. And down under, Australia has a desert plain, but in the water, the coral reefs a great chain. The last one is Antarctica, it's ice, ice, ice. There's mountains and there's valleys, but it's ice, ice, ice. We made it around the world, through ocean, land, and sea. We went real fast, it was a blast. Let's stop and have some tea.